Summer Grid Reliability Risk 2026. Facilities must act now. Why facilities teams need to act before the season starts. The summer reliability risk period used to be July and August. It's expanding in both directions. NERC's most recent assessment puts more regions at elevated risk than the agency has ever flagged at once, and the preparation window for facilities teams is shorter than seasonal planning calendars typically assume. There is a window between now and the first major heat event of the summer where facilities teams can still get ahead of grid stress. That window is shorter than it was 2 years ago, and the consequences of missing it have gotten more expensive. North American Electric Reliability Corporation's NERC 2025 Summer Reliability Assessment flagged elevated or high-risk conditions across a larger portion of the country than any prior summer reliability assessment the agency has published. The regions of concern span the Midwest, parts of the Southeast, portions of the Texas grid, and pockets of the West. What makes this year's picture notable isn't that grid stress exists, it's the combination of factors creating it simultaneously. Higher peak demand forecasts, generation capacity coming offline ahead of schedule, and weather pattern data pointing toward a hotter-than-average summer in several of the most heavily loaded regions. Why summer peak grid stress events are arriving earlier in the season. Summer grid stress used to be a predictable and bounded phenomenon. Temperatures rise in July, cooling demand spikes, utilities activate demand response programs, operators manage through the peak days. The reliability risk was real but confined to a reasonably well-understood window. That bounded quality is diminishing. Heat events are arriving earlier in the season. Spring grid stress, a category that barely existed in utility planning a decade ago, is now appearing in NERC's analysis as a growing concern in certain regions. The U.S. Energy Information Administration's EIA 2026 Summer Energy Outlook projects that cooling degree days will run above the 10-year average in most of the country, with the heaviest impact in regions where grid capacity is already tightest. For facilities teams, this means the assumption that June is preparation time and July is the risk period no longer holds across all geographies. In some regions, peak events are already occurring in May. Facilities entering summer without completed demand response enrollment, tested backup systems, and reviewed load curtailment protocols are starting behind before the season officially begins. How unmanaged peak demand events show up in commercial electricity bills. The cost of grid stress events for unprepared facilities is often underestimated until it arrives. Peak demand charges, calculated based on the highest demand level recorded in a given billing period, can be triggered by a single 15-minute peak event and affect billing for an entire month. For large commercial and industrial facilities, one unmanaged peak demand event can add tens of thousands of dollars to a monthly bill before any operational disruption costs are factored in. Beyond the billing impact, unplanned outages during peak grid stress events create operational disruption, supply chain consequences, and in some regulated industries, compliance exposure. Facilities with demand response agreements in place and the load management systems to execute on them are typically limiting financial exposure while earning demand response revenue that partially offsets their energy cost. Facilities without those agreements absorb the full cost of events they could have mitigated. Summer Grid Readiness Checklist for Facilities and Operations Teams. The work falls into 3 categories, and all 3 require action before summer begins, not during it. The first is enrollment and documentation. Demand response programs run by utilities have enrollment windows that close before the summer reliability period begins. Any facility that isn't already enrolled and wants to participate in the upcoming summer season needs to move now. The same applies to demand response aggregator programs, which pool load from multiple facilities and can offer more flexible participation terms than direct utility programs. The second is systems verification. Backup generation equipment that sits idle for months doesn't reliably perform when it's needed. Testing backup systems, verifying that fuel supplies are adequate, and confirming that automatic transfer switches operate correctly are basic steps that get deferred more often than they should. The middle of a peak event is the wrong time to discover that a diesel generator hasn't been load tested in 18 months. The third is protocol and communication. Operations teams need clarity about what load curtailment looks like, which loads get shed first, who has authority to make that call, and how the decision gets communicated across shifts and functions. Without a practiced protocol, curtailment decisions get made reactively under pressure, and the outcomes are less controlled and more expensive than they need to be. None of this is technically complicated. All of it is time-sensitive. The facilities teams treating summer readiness as an April problem rather than a May problem will have more options when the first major event of the season arrives. You've been listening to Sustainability Soundbites by Environment+Energy Leader. For partnership opportunities, please reach out to our team.